Robots and Avatars is a project that's emerged from a lot of work that Body Data Space and our previous company Shinkansen's done across the years, and some of you will recognise where we're coming from, as we're very much based at the body at the centre of digital interaction. And it's a project which has been specifically designed to look much more clearly at how young people will work and play with new representational forms of themselves and others in virtual and physical life in the next 10 to 15 years. There's 5 key areas, and I'm just going to show some very fast through some slides around that and talk about those key areas that we've put together for you today, Leanne and I. Navigation and orientation, interauthorship and collaboration, virtual intimacy, virtual touch, and the growth of teleintuition as we all get more experience and as the younger generations don't find this hard at all. So you're collaborating as a group from where you are and with the group in the distance space, but also within the group you're in. Collective collaboration is absolutely key, and I do realise from reading a lot at the moment that, for example, in Japan, in primary schools, they're actually teaching collective collaboration now at the early years level. So that this is an area that I think we've still got quite a long way to go on here, actually, about whole acceptance of group and collective work practice, the interauthorship side, which we've worked with for many years. Intimacy and trust. You know, we tend to have quite an uptight presence. We're not, you know, particularly our generation is not totally readily used to being filmed and being live out there all the time. Rather than replace the live presence, to actually extend and enhance live presence through telepresence. So what do we learn from this telematic side? So our aims have always been on that community cultural understanding and trust, the build-up of that, obviously collaboration and group processing skills, sharing creation processes, and very importantly knowledge exchange and barter of skills. Rather than thinking just global, actually really trying to make that community link between local to local, school to school, or youth centre to youth centre is very key to get more intimacy, to get more sense of belonging. We know that in the last 5 or 6 years there's been a lot more development of telepresence within everyday life. We've got Skype, very good example I think, where many people have learnt a lot more about telepresence, where families are being connected all over the world, where anyone can download it and do it for free. A lot of people learning and having fun there.
Okay, yeah, well, when I was initially sort of given the brief of examining behaviours and ethics from a sort of gaming context, I struggled, to be honest. There's in particular one problem, particularly as far as ethics are concerned, because a lot of people play games to actually abandon their normal, ordinary ethical codes. And that's one of the best things about video games, is that they give you a sort of safe space, at least when you play them on your own, in which to completely abandon all morals and ethics and behave like you would never behave in real life. Obviously, as far as the tabloids are concerned, the big debate is if you're allowed to behave however you want to behave in games, does that spill over into real life? Now, you'd think that'd be something that there'd be vast amounts of research going on into, but annoyingly, that's not the case at all, and that's certainly a big issue for the industry. Age ratings. Until recently, in the UK, there were 2 competing age rating systems, and obviously that led to a lot of confusion. So you get sort of 12-year-old kids playing 18-rated games. At least over here, it is actually illegal for people under the age of 18 to own an 18-rated game. There's plenty of places in the world where that's not the case. All the consoles, you can do what's known as parental lockout, which means that you can set a password if you're a parent. So the trouble is, the only people, they're usually set to, parental lockout is set to off by default, and the only people who usually know how to set them are the kids who are playing the consoles. But again, Dr. Tanya Byron in particular has been doing a lot of research into that sort of thing, and that's being tightened up.
Yes.
In terms of both ethics and behaviour in gaming. The landscape changed when we got pervasive broadband, and in particular when Microsoft launched its Xbox Live service. Now we have Xbox Live and Sony's PlayStation Network, and even the Wii has an online network. So when people start discovering the joys of playing games against humans rather than AI, behaviour and ethics changed massively in games. Now that sort of online gaming is reaching maturity, there's moderation and matching are getting better. So matching your sort of game skills, and an Xbox Live, for example, if someone's giving you abuse, you can report them, and Microsoft, because it's a closed system, doesn't go over the web. Microsoft's quite rigorous at kicking people off it. And the other big issue, of course, is obsessive play. We're always hearing about people dying in South Korea because they've just spent 5 days playing World of Warcraft or StarCraft without eating anything. Or there was a terrible case recently of a baby who was neglected while the couple were sort of raising a virtual baby. It's how sort of deeply obsessed do you become with these games, and is that a sort of reflection of the game or a reflection of your personality? A recent trend, games have been appearing. I mean, games are always derided for being mindless, but that's not necessarily the case anymore. Games have been appearing that have sort of hinged on ethical dilemmas, and there was a brilliant one earlier this year called Heavy Rain, in which you play a sort of hapless father whose son goes missing and is apparently kidnapped, and he tries to find him. And the whole game regularly involves you in ethical dilemmas. For example, there's one classic bit where you've been sort of kidnapped yourself and you've escaped, and you've got an opportunity to kill your kidnapper. Do you kill him or do you sort of incapacitate him? And so I thought that was a great thing, and it was very successful and much admired, because it really sort of took you deep into the sort of emotional life of a character. Now, I mean, every year the graphics capability of games increases, and there's a school of thought which suggests that one day games will all end up looking the same, i.e. pretty much like real life. So when that happens, it's all going to be about sort of how deeply you get involved in them. So this is a nice direction for games to take, in my opinion. There are also precious few, it must be said, but a few games that look at sort of serious ethical issues. Classic ones. I think it was Danish. It was developed in Denmark, a game called Global Conflict Palestine, which was really which came out a few years ago. It was educational essentially, but it really sort of put you in modern day Palestine, and forced you to sort of confront all the issues from both the sort of Palestinian and Israeli side. When you play World of Warcraft, when you form a guild with your mates, you have to operate collaboratively, otherwise you won't get anywhere. So games are already sort of getting into those areas. It would perhaps be nice if they got further into those areas. Yeah, we cotton wool parents rather their kids learn moral codes through video games. If they're not going to let them out to play, then they've got to expect that they're going to sit around inside the whole time.
I've worked in virtual worlds, virtual worlds, both isolated systems, online sort of VRML, things like that, for the better part of 10 years. And even though I played with early shared virtual environments like Active Worlds and Adobe Atmosphere in the early 2000s, I didn't find them that interesting. And the reason is because it was just a realm of exotic specialization. It was just a few of us working in them, and there was no real community to speak of. I think Second Life has really changed the landscape. In no way is it near the sort of uptake of things like World of Warcraft. But you still have, at any given time, you still have several million people running around in this shared virtual environment with no games objective. So they took the best of the gaming world in terms of the engines to run it and the protocols that they use, but then they repurposed it for this other social space, which is a very interesting space. I think if we're considering behaviors and ethics, we do have to look at gaming, because that's where most people get their experiences of this from. If we look at this slide here, I mean, the three consoles of the current generation, they all have Avatar. Avatar use is absolutely embedded into the core essential of what these systems do, how these systems are used by people. With the younger generations, a lot of things have changed. I just wanted to bring up this little story because I think it just speaks volumes. In 2005, a young Chinese girl died playing Warcraft. It was a holiday, she played straight for 3 days, and she died of exhaustion. A week later, a funeral was held for her, not in our reality, but in her reality, in world, in game, in Warcraft, amongst her guild and her peers. If we think about issues like trust, accountability, in a system of, in physical reality, we're linked to our bodies. In these virtual spaces, that can be subverted. So we think about all the ethical implications that arise out of that. We live in a world already of ID theft, of criminal role playing. How is this going to affect things in the future? Quite a problem. Because there are 2 points. If we look at, on one hand, accessibility, which of course is supremely important to get people using these systems. Things have to be open and usable. But then security. And they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, but they're certainly part of the same equation. So we have to find the right balances. And those balances, of course, will always be shifting. We have to prepare them as best we can, but we have to also kind of be able to step back and remember that our problems aren't going to be their problems, and our solutions aren't going to be their solutions. So I think it's more about having the right dialogues through education than necessarily being very prescriptive and saying, well, this is how you do things. Because technology, and of course, how we need to interface with technology is always changing.
What is it about these environments that make them effective practice environments for decision making under stress? How are you going to enable people to appear in the virtual world? Are you going to care that the term cross-dresser may actually be appropriate or not appropriate in some environments? Is it okay to let people be the opposite sex in their avatars, because you either get to log in as one or the other in this case? And I think it raises up some different issues that can be discussed here of how might people represent themselves. But what I've also seen through countless hours of exercises and meetings in these virtual worlds is different behaviors that make you, at least make me, really uncomfortable. When you think about it, they're just digital pixels, but you actually feel a lot of emotion. When another avatar comes up to you and is standing too close, you feel as uncomfortable as you do in the real world. When everybody's sitting there, like in here, what happens when one person won't sit down? It actually makes you really uneasy, which is stupid, right? How much freedom do you give people in these virtual worlds? So with a client that was looking to deploy this for some 20,000 people around the world, they were coming into the virtual world to have a briefing on what the capabilities are, and I made a huge mistake. I left the keys to the virtual Humvee where people could find them. In other words, I put them into an environment where they could just get vehicles and drive them around. While I'm giving the briefing, the head of technology at this big company thought it would be hilarious to run people over, which was not only really distracting, but really annoying to the people that were trying to watch, as well as me. But he thought it was really funny. And some people then came back and said, well, I don't think it's a very professional environment. Okay, it wasn't that day, but if you give people the freedom to do different things, sometimes they'll they'll act in inappropriate ways. But of course you don't want to be too controlling at the same time. As we get increasing realism, I think it also has to do, there's some ethical considerations. For example, in the emergency response scenario, it's flooding and the power station's going to get flooded, and when that goes out, you've got to choose which hospital are you going to show up with the generators, and guess what? You've only got one, and you got to choose which people are going to not live. Well, that's a really tough decision to make in general, but today it's just done by reading stuff. What if we put people into the virtual hospital and you actually see some older avatars in there groaning, and you get some real emotional heartstrings pulled on that. In terms of emotional fidelity, these kinds of immersive environments have a lot more emotional triggers. And so what are the ethical considerations of exposing people to this as part of their training?